Good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to attend this Fundamental Analysis 101 session. I know yung picture ko dyan kanina, hindi naman mukhang fun guy ako eh. I mean, mukha akong seryoso dyan kasi nakuha yan ng trader pa ako eh. But babawi tayo sa session na to. Let's try to make it fun. So special shout out sa students from the Visayan region, mga kababayan ko. Maayong aga, maayong buntag sa inyo tanan. I'm happy to see that we have entries sa Stock Research Challenge even outside NCR. Since good opportunity talaga to for students all around the country. Kahit 11-11 ngayon, good job na you opted to attend the PSE Campus Expo to focus on your financial future versus short-term satisfaction sa online shopping. So let me introduce myself. I'm Rico Locsin, a Client Acquisitions Officer from BPI Trade. I graduated from De La Salle University not too long ago and have been in the equities industry for most of my professional career. I was an equities dealer or trader, para sa iba, for 8 years, handling foreign and domestic institutional accounts. Okay? All right. So this is Fundamental Analysis 101. First of all, hindi ako nag-expect na magiging experts tayo lahat sa valuation or sa fundamental analysis after this session, okay? But what I would like is that you use this as you further your investing knowledge. Kanina, yung friends natin from COL, sila Zane, we're discussing anong options nyo sa investing, making your first 100K, di ba? As a student, soon to be graduating. Pero ako, I would like our students and participants to understand the process on how our other brokerages, analysts, prepare a research report. How they come up with the price targets. If nakikita niyo yung mga TP, ang tinatawag na TP, hindi yan sa ML na TP, TP yan sa research reports. How they come up with the price targets, if it's a buy or a sell, or a hold or a sell. Rare tayo makakita ng sell sa brokerage side, but sometimes it does happen. Eventually naman kasi, we would like your generation, the Gen Z generation, kasi ako, millennials pa, to also be active participants in the Philippine equities market. So it is important that we understand kung ano yung sinasabi ng mga experts natin. All right? So before we start, before we dive deeper into the topic, we need to define ano ba talaga yung fundamental analysis. Fundamental analysis is the process to determine a company's intrinsic, true, or fair market value. Pero mapapatanong ka, what is intrinsic ba? What is fair? Intrinsic value takes into account the company's financial condition, yung industrial setting niya, kung how the industry is, economic condition of the country, as well as overall market conditions like yung Philippine equities market, yung global equities market, yung bond market. Analysts, yung mga sa research, most often employ a top-down approach. Ito yung parang inverted pyramid, inverted triangle, to determine value, which starts, again, with the economy, the specific industry yung tinatarget nyo ng market, and the company itself. So, ano tinitingnan talaga nila? Anong mga specific data yung titingnan nila? We look at corporate disclosures, which, for the benefit of everybody, i-post na lang natin yung PSE Edge website. Edge. Yun yung makikita yung corporate disclosures ng lahat na listed companies. There you'll see the annual and quarterly corporate financial statements like the balance sheet. Alam na to ng mga business students natin, income statement, and the cash flow statement. With that, our analysts or research people focus on revenue, kita, and the earnings growth, how they will grow in the next years. Also, profit margins, the return on equity, and other relevant financial ratios. I'll be discussing that later. Lastly, of course, the analyst looks into recent economic, local, and international news updates because no company lives in an island. Maapektuhan talaga tayo sa mga nangyayari outside. Diba? So, this may affect business prospects of the company that we are evaluating. Okay. Kanina alam ko na discuss din yung trader ka ba, short-term investor, yung nagde-day trade. So fundamental analysis is often compared to technical analysis. In the investment community, for sure talaga ako may marinig ka, what technique do you employ? Fundamental analysis or technical analysis? So we won't be discussing technical analysis in depth today, but technical analysis is a method or a discipline that looks to predict stock price movements based on past market data or previous market data, which also takes into account volume, how many shares yung natitrade, and of course, the price mismo. With fundamental analysis na naman, we analyze yung company mismo, the company itself. We study its financial statements, earnings, again, or profits, and then again, we predict the growth. Fundamental analysts use ratios and to determine the what? The fair value or the value. Yung focus lang talaga on the stock price data where they look at historical patterns. If nasasabi niyo mga head and shoulders, narinig yun yung mga patterns, yung mga ascending triangle, di ba? Technical analysts use chart analysis and technical tools like example, yung mga RSI, MACD, to determine if the price is at a low or at a high level. All right. So fundamental analysis, we have two types of data. We have qualitative data and quantitative data. Quantitative data includes looking at, again, the financial statements. We crunch the numbers. Alam ko, marami sa mga students, kahit ako, may bagsak ako sa math. Pero eventually, when you are in the industry, you get to appreciate the numbers. Pag nakikita mo, dito napupunta yung, example, dati ang capex for me is just a word nung nag-aaral ako sa finance. Pero na-explain na ng mga CFOs anong ginagawa sa capex, mas na-appreciate mo siya. So, ayun, we look at the numbers, we look at the ratios, we look at economic indicators. Dati wala akong kaalaman naman ng inflation. Pero ngayon, na-appreciate ko na yung inflation, yung mga GDP, yung mga unemployment numbers, di ba? Yung utang ng Pilipinas, yung debt. Next, on the qualitative data naman, we're focused on the less tangible items such as the quality and the standards of the products of the companies. We look at the management's capability. Capable ba yung leaders nila? Yung corporate governance structure ba nila? Trustworthy? Do they look after the needs of the investors and not just themselves? Diba? That happens eh. Will they be affected by the current global climate, which covers peace and trade? National stability, example, so Pilipinas, if we have unrest or discontent across the nation, this will definitely affect business prospects of your chosen company or kahit man lang industry. So as discussed earlier, di ba may sinabi ko yung top-down approach, yung inverted pyramid. This is the inverted pyramid. So this is the top-down approach. As you can see, it's like an inverted pyramid when we look at the macro elements or the economy, then the specific industry, and drill down to the micro, which is the company. When we look at the economy, it is not just within yung borders ng Pilipinas. Since, example ngayon, we can feel the interest rate hikes and inflation numbers stateside sa US. It's greatly affecting the situation ng other countries worldwide. Like when the US Federal Reserve or their own central bank raise rates due to their all-time high inflation also. If feeling natin malala yung inflation sa atin, even in the US, it's as bad. And in the UK, the US dollar was strengthening kasi pinapataasin na yung rates nila. Ano nangyari? Yung Pilipinas, we're about to hit 60 or we're at 59. Right now, nag-settle down to the 58 level, but you see that there's impact not just locally, but also abroad. And this also impacts our prices just because the Philippines, we import a lot of stuff. We don't export. So we don't export as much. So yung commodity prices natin tumataas din. So after our economic analysis, we focus on the industry. If it will prosper in that given economy. Tapos lastly, doon na tayo sa company level. Okay, first level ng top-down approach. So from the top-down approach, we start off with the economy. What are the measures of economic strength? We have output, which is the GDP, yung GDP, gross domestic product, and then we have employment, and then we have price stability measured by inflation. For output, we have the gross domestic product or GDP. We have to determine if the country's GDP is high, and even if it's high, sustainable dapat yung growth. What factors in the GDP are at risk, diba, to a possible recession, or just like recently a pandemic. Ang doon was we were always consuming, diba? Hindi tayo makalabas, hindi tayo makagastos. So na-affect yung that aspect of the GDP. For employment, we look at the participation sa labor force, diba? Is the company experiencing high employment with low involuntary unemployment? Diba? You could be unemployed, but that's by choice. Do we also experience high unemployment where though an individual do we experience underemployment where kahit employed ka, alam mong kulang yung kita mo, so willing ka get extra hours sa trabaho so that you can get extra income. Case in point ngayon, taas yung inflation, taas ng mga bilihin, we need extra income. Last but not the least is price stability. Is inflation manageable or not spiking? So inflation naman is generally considered as harmful. Pag narinig mo inflation, ang negative agad ng connotation. But if there is a manageable uptick in inflation, it can also suggest that the economy is growing. If manageable lang, because gumagalaw yung money supply, yung people gumagastos, meaning may panggastos yung tao. But the current situation ngayon, that's not the scenario na gumagastos just because gusto. Wala tayong choice because low supply na, tapos mahal pa. Okay. So now let's dig a little deeper sa gross domestic product or GDP. So GDP is the sum of the market value of all final goods and services produced in a country during a specified period. So for example, if we have a Brazilian citizen operating a restaurant here in the Philippines, will that be part of our GDP? Yes, kasi ang business niya nandito sa Philippines. How about a Filipino citizen naman operating a Filipino grocery in New York? Hindi yan kasama because ang business niya kumikita doon sa US. Hindi yan kasama sa output natin. Maybe the goods na nakuha niya because Filipino grocery kasama sa output, but whatever the Filipino citizen sells there, sa US GDP side na yan. So as long as goods or services are produced within our borders, that is part of our national GDP. In GDP is calculated in the formula shown on the screen. It includes personal consumption, as discussed earlier, our household consumption. Our country is known to be a consumption-driven economy, and that is why during the peak of the pandemic, the GDP had a sharp drop as we were all under the lockdown, diba? Except yung mga nag-order ng food to Food-Panda or Grab or online shopping sa Lazada and Shopee. So there are two types of GDP that you will encounter and need to take note of. One is nominal GDP, which is calculated using raw numbers. This doesn't take into account kahit may inflation. Like now, taas ng inflation, tataas ng bilihin. So raw numbers lang yan. It won't take into account na dapat ma-adjust mo. Nominal GDP is calculated, yun yung formula sa harap mo, yun yung formula for nominal GDP. While real GDP, on the other hand, uses constant prices that are adjusted for inflation, which mas, mas accurate. Alright. So alam ko medyo nosebleed yan for our non-business majors or our non-finance majors. So to simplify lang to. Between the difference between nominal GDP and real GDP. In 2020, we sold 4 houses at 5 million pesos each, diba? So that this totals to 20 million pesos in GDP. Tapos in 2021, we sold 4 similar houses at 5.5 million pesos each, totaling to 22 million. Sa nominal GDP mo, may growth ka na 10%. But hindi yan na-take into account na nag-inflation na 10%. So, yun yung problem ng nominal growth lang or nominal GDP. Hindi yan na-take into account na nagtaas lang yung prices, but yung output mo, you didn't sell anything extra. You sold the same number of houses, same example, same model siya. So yung growth ng services and goods mo, wala. Hindi naman. Yung pricing lang nagtumaas kasi nominal growth lang siya. To get real GDP, use the base price ng 2020 at 5 million each, diba? Which will end with a real GDP of 0% growth. Pero 20 million naman yung GDP mo as a whole. Pero hindi siya nag-grow. So to have growth, here though we see that if we sold another house and used the base price of 5 million pesos, we have a real GDP growth of 25%. Basic lang yan. Alam ko, yung mga eco majors natin, wala na yan. So I just want to share a chart from the PSA showing year-on-year real GDP growth rates using the 2018 as our base year. The sharp drops in 2020 was affected by massive restrictive lockdowns, but the big spikes naman in 2020 man, papasabi ka, wow, 12%. Pero kasi kung year-on-year growth yan, ang base mo naman is 2020, which mababa yung base year mo. So you may say na maganda yung 12%, but that's actually not as good as where we were in 2019. If nakita nyo yung pinaka-recent na GDP numbers, that was at 7.6%. That was a surprise versus what our analysts were expecting at around 6.2 to 6.3%. So that was good news yesterday. So the next measure of economic strength is employment. So the country as of 2020 has a total population of 109 million Filipinos, and of that, 76.8 million is 15 years old or older and can join the labor force. The labor force, though, refers to the population of those 15 years old and older and who want to contribute or seek to contribute in the production of goods or services. So yung gusto talaga magtrabaho. So this is either employed ka na or naghahanap ka ng trabaho. So of that 76.8 million as of September 2022, 50 million are part of the labor force. So may work or naghahanap ng work, with the labor force participation pegged at 65%. Of those in the labor force, employment rate is 95% or 47.6 million. This was at a low last year in 2020. If I'm not wrong, at 90%. So 10% dun last time walang trabaho, peak of the pandemic. So pero of the 47.58 million, 7.33 million consider themselves underemployed, meaning may work nga sila pero kulang yung kinikita. Willing sila maghanap pa ng extra work or extra time to increase the income. So, and unemployment rate for as of September 2022 is at 2.5 million. Ito yung mga naghahanap talaga ng work. Okay. Next indicator is Next measure of economic strength is price stability, which is measured through inflation. Inflation is the annual rate of change or the year-on-year change in the consumer price index. It is also sometimes called headline inflation. Ito yung indicator of the change of the average retail prices of a fixed basket of goods. I will be sharing that later. Ano mga goods yung tinatrack ng Philippine government sa prices. But these are the goods and services usually purchased by households. Yung core inflation, on the other hand, measures the same as inflation, the CPI, but inaalis nila yung mga volatile, which includes the food and energy items. So as you can see, to the right of the screen is the major commodity groups that is included in the basket to measure CPI. So inaalis dyan yung, as you can see, yung alcoholic beverages and tobacco, or food and non-alcoholic beverages, and then yung sa energy, it's beside it din. Yun yung inaalis for core inflation. So just last week, the PSA reported that the October inflation was at a 14-year high at 7.7%, which brought our average inflation for the year to 5.4%. The main source of the acceleration in October, the PSA noted, was that food and non-alcoholic beverages, which jumped by 9.4% year-on-year, which has an 80.9 or 81% share sa inflation sa Pilipinas. So kita niyo yung food talaga yung nag-affect ng inflation sa Pilipinas. Sa vegetables, tingnan niyo 16% inflation. Sa meats, it's 11.5%. Tapos sa sugar and confectionery, yun, sa mga taga Negros, it's at 34%. Pasalamat yun, may supply dun sa Negros eh. Okay. So let's discuss naman. Ano yung tools na ginagamit ng national government together with the central bank to achieve yung mga economic targets nila? Because the government can't just sit down doing nothing and expect the private sector to do everything. First, we have what we call monetary policy. Monetary policy is done through the actions of the BSP or the central bank so that we can achieve sustainable economic growth. First is the policy rates. If you have been following recent events, if you have been following recent events on the news, you would have heard that the central bank has been raising what we call benchmark rates. Currently, it's at 4.25%, but in November 17, the Bangko Central Governor already expressed na hindi, tataas kami ng another 0.75% or 75 bips kahit hindi pa nagmi-meeting. They've been raising the rates to fight off inflation, one, and somewhat protect the local currency from the strengthening US dollar. But how does this help? Diba? Isipin mo, anong gagawin ng interest rates para hindi magano inflation? This gives us consumers the incentive naman kasi to not spend using our money to purchase items, diba? This gives us incentive na mag-save tayo because yung savings natin sa banko is supposed to be dapat tataas din because ang nakukuha ng Bangko Sentral, nakukuha ng banks natin sa Bangko Sentral tumataas. So this will hindi naman incentivize us to not spend our money. Because of this, money supply inside the economy will be lowered because nasa savings natin, diba? Next also is the reserve requirement ratio or the RRR. This refers to the percentage because the banks, if hindi niyo pa alam, example, kung 100% ng cash, 100,000, hindi nila pwede yan ipautang sa mga tao. For one, they need liquidity kung sa mga depositors. For two, kailangan may buffer. So yung tinatawag na buffer na yan is the reserve requirement. Dine-deposit nila yan sa BSP. Right now, it's at 12%. So 12% ng deposits ng bank, hindi talaga nila pwedeng galawin. So what the BSP does, if ayaw nila ng money supply outside, which can cause inflation na pataas yung money supply, sasabihin nila, taasin namin to 15% yung triple R or 18% yung triple R para lang hindi gumalaw yung pera. Because if there's a lot of money going around the economy, mas tumataas yung inflation. And lastly, for monetary policy, we have what we call open market operations. This is like the trading activity of the central bank, where the purchase and sale of government securities is in the open market. This can also affect money supply with the as the BSP buys more government securities, diba, from the banks. It means if they buy government securities, they release more cash. So money supply din. But if they sell more government securities, ang banks magbabayad sa kanila, wala namang pera yung banks para magpa-loan out. So they manage money supply. And lastly, we have what we call fiscal policy, which is controlled by the executive branch of government or yung side ng presidente. Fiscal policy focuses on tax collection and saan natin ilalagay yung taxes. Kailangan yung projects natin makaka-generate ng business activity. If gagawa tayo ng highway, for one, magkaka-benefit naman yung construction. But of course, in the long run, this will help steer up the economy na yung business is easier to access, diba? So that's where fiscal policy comes in, kung saan ilalagay yung resources natin. All right. So now we are at the industry level of the top-down approach. Industry analysis naman assesses the unique characteristics of a particular industry and how this can be good sa business nyo. This is classified on either as how the industry reacts to the current business cycle ba, or recession or economic growth, or where it is in its own industry life cycle. Classifying an industry on how it is expected or anticipated to react and anticipate its behavior in response to movements of the business cycle. Ito yung reaction to the business cycle, how we classify an industry, whether it's in expansion phase yung business cycle, is it peaking, contraction ba tayo, nag-recession, or nasa throne. So one classification on how they react are growth industries. Growth industries have above normal expansion in sales and profits that are independent of the business climate. Kahit saan siya, kahit pandemic, kahit man maganda yung ekonomiya, above yung sales nila ang taas. Even in times of recession or contraction, the industry will continue to see sales and earnings rise. Good example, pandemic, may recession tayo. Nag-boom yung e-commerce and e-wallet platforms like GCash, Shopee, and Foodpanda because we cannot go out. So people have a need to use this mga e-commerce platform. Next, we have defensive industries where we can expect stable performance during both the ups and the downs. During the growth phase or expansionary phase, these industries show strong growth, but kahit sa recessions, they have normal dip. If they have a dip, maliit lang. Some examples of these industries that are defensive are like the utilities, example, Manila Water or Meralco, and then mga fuel businesses. Kasi kailangan talaga natin ng fuel, but special case ng pandemic kasi hindi lumalabas talaga yung tao. In other recessions kasi, we still use fuel. We also have cyclical industries where they track, yung cyclical, nagtatrack talaga sa business cycle. So if down yung business cycle mo, down din yung earnings mo. Pero pag up naman yung business cycle, exponentially up din yung earnings ng mga cyclical industries. Example ng mga cyclical industries, yung automotive industry, yung construction, or yung airline business, of course, connected to the tourism industry. All right. Another classification is through the industry's own life cycle. Example, during the introduction phase, this involves the development of the products, the marketing. Usually fragmented pa to eh. Yung yung industry sa introduction phase because hindi pa siya kilala. And unprofitable pa siya because ang daming research and development and willing to spend yung industries at this stage of their life cycle. Next is the growth phase where kilala na siya ng consumers or clients niya and understand the value of the product of this specific sector or industry. The business gains more attention and ang focus nila is to improve and expand. Next is the maturity phase where the growth starts to slow down and usually mga big players will start to eat up the weaker ones to expand. Kasi parang na ano na wala nang masyadong room for growth na natural. So kukuha na lang sa ng ibang businesses. During the maturity phase, it is harder for new players to enter since ang lalakas na ng mga early entrants. Lastly is the decline phase where the market, where this marks the end of the industry's ability to support growth. It will eventually turn obsolete and see declining revenues, yung industry or yung sector. So what things do we look at when we look at the sector, diba? We use Porter's 5 competitive forces. So the collective strength of the 5 forces determines the industry's potential for value creation. If may value ba dito for you to invest, diba? Competition drives the company's ROI through the opportunity cost of capital. So, what is the bargaining power suppliers? If the suppliers have an edge versus the industry or you or the company, that is a risk. Diba? Ng pressure na sila if sila lang talaga nagsusupply ng products mo, they can raise their prices, they can lower the quality and the availability. Or pwede din may bargaining power yung buyers mo. Alam nila marami kayo nagsusupply. So they can request for cheaper products, cheaper services, but better quality. Of course, we assess if it's easy for new entrants pumasok sa industry mo. And then, how is the rivalry? Because rivalry isn't bad per se because it gives you the chance to develop your products kasi nape-pressure ka sa kalaban mo. Example, like sa telco natin. Pag may nakikita kang maganda yung example, telco A, bumaba siya ng pricing, 100 Mbps pero naging 1,000 na lang. So yung other telcos can't just leave that alone. Kailangan din nila mag-adjust ng prices. And of course, may substitute products ba or services sa sector mo. Okay, nasa company level na tayo. Company analysis naman involves the analysis of individual stocks or companies to determine whether this company will prosper in the given economy and industry. This also aims to determine whether undervalued ba yung company versus how the market perceives it. Yung market price versus yung valuation mo. Eventually, you will have to make your own valuation or the valuation ng mga analysts. So the types of companies we may encounter is, a growth company. It's a company whose business generates positive cash flows, significant positive cash flows or earnings at faster rates versus what we expect it to do, diba? A growth company tends to be very profitable, and instead of you will rarely see a growth company give out dividends because they'd rather reinvest it because may tiwala sila sa kakayahan ng management na instead na i-release natin yung dividends, we can just give more value to our investors by growing the company using those earnings. They want to maximize the opportunities. Next are the defensive companies where we see sales and earnings remain relatively stable during both economic upturns and downturns. Defensive companies tend to make products or services that are essential to consumers, where these products are likely to be purchased whether the economy is booming or recession. Perfect example is yung mga hospitals. Kahit anong situation, yung hospitals will be okay. We then have the cyclical companies where sales and earnings are also influenced by the aggregate business cycle as discussed earlier. High growth during booming economy and during a downturn, massive drop. Yun, mga car dealerships, cement, or construction. Okay. So, alam ko nakikita niyo if nakita niyo na yung mga stock research challenge, ito dapat yung valuation process nila ng ginawa nila. So at first, they need to look at understand anong ginagawa ng business. Hindi ka lang pwedeng give me XYZ company. Oh, tingnan ko na yung financials na hindi. Kailangan mo muna tingnan anong ginagawa ng business nila. Is it a conglomerate? Is it a bank? Because magkaiba yung styles eh. Is it in the consumer food group? Is it in real estate? So you have to understand ano yung business, ano yung ginagawa ng business, ano yung long-term gusto ng mangyari ng business. And then that's when we look at the financials kung to check the company performance. We use the financial statements. After that, gagamit tayo ng kung anong valuation model. I will discuss at least one valuation model later, which is most often used by our analysts namin sa BPI Securities. And from my previous brokerages, alam ko nagagamit din nila yung ganyang na analysis. And then that's when you make the investment decision. So it's a process. So if you as a student understands the process, alam mo na kung saan nanggagaling yung mga analysts natin. And eventually, sana kayo din makagawa ng own analysis nyo. So this is the most common. This is called the discounted cash flow valuation. So we use this valuation technique. We focus on this valuation technique focuses on the future value, the future cash flows. We find the present value. How much is a future cash flow of 100 or 1 million pesos today? So ginagawa ng mga analysts is they calculate the worth today based on the future returns. Also, they use a discount rate. Ang discount rate sa Philippines is usually the treasury bills or what we call the government bill or government bonds. Why do we use the risk-free rate? Kung ano yung earnings mo, ang mga interest sa government securities, why do we use the government securities as a risk-free rate? Because government securities are considered risk-free assets. Because, example, kung ang Philippines mag-ano ng bonds, we can always print pesos and mababayaran ka ng government. So this is the discounted cash flow. We can access this if you want. I won't be discussing this in depth, but we will. Sorry, you can access this later sa booth namin. We'll try to upload it. Also, another way to value companies is to compare them sa peers nila, which is called the relative valuation techniques. It provides information on how the market is currently valuing securities. Example, yung PE ratio, cash flow ratio, book value ratio, and price to sales ratio. It's good in a sense na because if we talk about absolutes sa absolute valuation, hindi mo maisip, is it actually doing well compared to, example, if you have a real estate, is it actually doing well versus its peers? Is it actually doing well versus previously doing the past 5 years? Baka sabihin mo, ay maganda naman, pero medyo nag-drop pala. So yun yung point ng relative valuation techniques. You use the ratios to see if para lang ma-compare mo siya sa ibang especially sa mga peers niya. So one of the most popular relative valuation multiples is what we call the price to earnings ratio. It is calculated by dividing the stock price by the earnings per share. It is also, the EPS is found in the financials, and it is expressed as a company's share price as a multiple of its earnings. So a company with a high PE ratio is trading at a higher price per peso. So how much pesos are you willing to spend for 1 peso earning ng company yan? So usually, ang high PE is meaning medyo mahal siya. in theory. Likewise, a low PE ratio is trading at a lower price per peso of EPS and is considered undervalued. So if you look at like a group of food manufacturers, tingnan mo yung mga PE nila, may average talaga yan. So if it's trading below the average, maybe it's a chance to buy. But don't use that as an absolute. You have to check bakit undervalued siya. May problems ba sa kanina, like sa management? May problema ba sa plans nila? So these are taken into account ng mga investors. So hindi lang pwede na automatic pag undervalued, buy na siya talaga agad. Then we have the return on common equity, which is a measure of financial performance calculated by dividing net income by shareholders' equity. So ROE measures profitability and how efficient the company is in generating profits from its capital, from its puhunan. So kung mataas yung kita niya versus lower yung capital nilagay mo, mataas yung return on equity mo. So meaning, nagagamit nila sa tama yung puhunan. Okay. Lastly, we have the price to book ratio. It refers to the company's current market value versus its book value. So if it's at 1, meaning it's fairly valued, yung book value mo. If it's below 1, undervalued, while if it's over 1, it's overvalued. So usually, PB ratio is used sa mga banks because ang banks, you measure them how they ultimately use their assets, which is the deposits, the cash from the deposits, versus their liabilities, which is our deposit also. So utang naman kasi ng banko yung deposit. So ayun, that's how we use sa mga banks yung ratio. It's better yung price to book ratio.